Hey guys, I'm Jake Halsey. I'm going to be presenting along with my group partner Patrick Weiss. What we're going to be presenting today is an application called LogReader Pro. Now the goal of LogReader Pro is to take what's called log files, which are recordings of sensor data from a car's ECU taken with another application, and we're going to take those files and we're going to import them into a SQL database, and then we're going to produce SQL reports using SSRS based on that data. So the goal here is to actually make it easier to learn how to make changes to a car's ECU and make it easier to evaluate what the ECU is actually doing. Now there are other applications that do this, mostly applications that already rewrite to the ECU and take the logs. The problem is because they do so many things, the UIs become very, very complicated and the reports often get buried into the applications. For instance, I use an application called EvoScan, and it took me several weeks just to figure out how to run a report. So right away we decided that we were not going to try to do an application that did everything like that. We were going to focus solely on the reporting aspect, and that would help us keep the UI simple, make it more learnable, and hopefully maintain usability for the users. Now, to accomplish that, we decided that we would rely on a very simple user interface that mainly used standard buttons and controls that were already included as a part of the Microsoft stack with form controls and SSRS window or report controls that are built into the .NET framework, which is what we ended up using to build the application. And to begin building the application, we first needed a set of use cases that would define our user requirements. And so we put together those use cases and then translated them into user stories, which we uploaded to a Visual Studio Online project so that we could use an agile methodology throughout development. Now, in order to visualize how our UI would meet those use cases, we put together a small wireframe project in Visual Studio, which at first contained only UI elements and basically just laid out as a dummy project how it would work. We used those to build the initial low-fidelity prototype that we turned in. Now, once we had that low-fidelity prototype, it wasn't actually that difficult for me to begin actual development and to produce a beta application that we could hand out to users in the car community or the automotive performance community to begin actually getting some feedback.
I'd like to talk about our feedback and data analysis. Right from the start, we wanted to try and get our application in the hands of our users. Jake has friends who tune their cars, and he is also involved with local car clubs, so we were able to use them as our initial test base. We gave them a beta version of the application and asked them to give us feedback. Some of them suggested additional features, while others listed some issues they had with the application. We were able to use this initial feedback to help construct our questionnaire and survey. If a user said they had issues with a certain aspect of the application, we could address this in our survey by asking the users if they liked the design of this feature or if they had suggestions to make it better. Overall, this allowed us to create a very specific and efficient questionnaire and survey.
So as Patrick said, we used their feedback to produce our questionnaire and surveys. And what we did for those surveys was basically rated every question 1 through 5. So the user would pick their feelings 1 through 5 on how well the application met a particular need or how it made them feel about a particular aspect of the application. And then for the interview questions, we allowed more open-ended questions, and then we would rate them 1 through 5 based on a particular category that we had determined the question was intended to measure. So, for example, we had questions about, was it easy to begin working, and that we used to rate 1 through 5 learnability. So it was very, very easy to go back and analyze those reports and kind of score the application to determine how well we'd hit the mark. So the interesting thing about going out into the real world and getting actual feedback from tuners throughout the development is that it kind of steered our development slightly away from some of the more straightforward approaches of the course, whereas with the course you're doing one time, going out and getting feedback, and then coming back and redesigning. We did that several times, so we had a couple redesign sessions where we had to really rethink things, and we were always making tweaks to the application really repeatedly from day one. And sometimes they were small things like, this column is too narrow, I can't read the key dates, so those had to be expanded at one point. Other things were, they wanted multiple logs at once. I want to be able to compare a previous log and then bring it in. But not only that, if I view all logs forever, then I can't actually read the report. It looks all cluttered like this report in the background here. And so we had to add in a way for them to filter those out very easily. Now, when you're using the web version of SSRS, that's very easy to do because you can just do a group by with a parameter, and then the parameter will automatically create a dropdown that's similar to the one that I'm using behind me on the screen. But at that point, there's a checkbox next to it, and you would just check the boxes and then hit view, and it looks very nice and works. Unfortunately, because we're using a desktop version of SSRS, that's not included, and so we had to kind of creatively program a way around that, which isn't necessarily a default Windows control. And I think this is the only place where we actually break from using default Windows controls. Even then, though, the second iteration that we kind of set out there with some of these features they were asking for still wasn't great. They still had the issues with the installers. Now, the installer issue was probably actually the first major issue that we ran into, and I would say probably the biggest over the course of the project. So what would happen is that we required .NET Framework 4.5 to be installed before you could use the application. This was to support not only the visual effects here, but those are included in most versions of .NET after 2.0, but also a CSV reading library that we incorporated to actually help us do the reading of the CSV files and then load them into SQL. There are a number of different formats out there that CSVs can actually come in, and you would think it would be a very simple comma-separated delimiter, but the actual files themselves can have different types, different types and formats that can actually complicate doing a simple filter on a delimiter. So we just use someone else's project that had already done that and built our project off of theirs. But that meant that we had to require this framework. And of course, users have no idea that that's out there, and they have no idea how to go and get it. So we ended up with a number of users who couldn't get the application installed on their own, even after being told where it was. And while this isn't a direct part of the user interface, it is a part of the human-computer interaction. It's a part of the person's total interaction with the system, and therefore a poor experience on installation could cause abandonment of the project as a whole. So right away we decided that had to be fixed. So we ended up going into the application and configuring it to actually search for and install any prerequisites that the user was missing before installing the application. So now all the user has to do to install LogReader Pro is download the software, open up the zip file that it comes in, and double-click a setup.exe. The remaining changes after that point were a lot smaller. We had stuff like, I think initially we called the button add logs to begin the import process, and some users found that kind of confusing, so it ended up getting changed to import log. I think another thing was the original version had reports with much smaller charts that were kind of difficult to read, so we were requested to make those larger, and that was pretty easy to do. Some other requests weren't actually able to be done. They wanted charts that they could resize on their own, or to be able to remove charts from the window. Unfortunately, SSRS doesn't allow for that. So in order to take something like this into production, we might actually have to consider using a different tool than SSRS, or moving at least to the web version, where we would have a little bit more, I think, professional quality UI controls to work with. Another option to do something similar to that might actually be to just build more reports for them. So instead of having these grouped reports where you're running 4 fields at a time, maybe just have them do like an injector duty cycle report, a knock cycle report, or a knock sum report. And that might make it easier for them, but that would have taken us several weeks to put together. Each one of these reports takes a day or two to put together, so we didn't have time to finish that in a functional way for the project. Along the same line, Patrick is now going to explain some of the things that we would need to do with the application to take it from our high-fidelity prototype and then bring it to a point where it would actually be able to be released out into the wild or in a production setting.
To allow us to take our application from prototype to production, we will need to finalize a couple of items. For one, we would like to implement a help menu. Most of our test users were very experienced with different tuning software, and they found our application easy to use. We also wanted our application to be usable by people new to tuning. If we could If we could add some simple tutorial videos and frequently asked questions, we believe we can make our app accessible to those users. We would also like to implement additional tooling that would allow users to specify new columns and column names for their data, as well as an advanced editor that would allow them to make changes to their currently existing data. The last piece of functionality we would like to add is the incorporation of the key dates into the reporting aspect of our app. After we finish these changes, our app would be ready for production.
And so that's it for as far as how the application works and what it is, how we built it. We also used a number of online tools throughout the development of the project, from a Visual Studio Online project that I mentioned earlier that we used for Agile methodology and sharing code, but also we used Google Docs to share our tasks back and forth before submitting them, and Skype quite a bit because we are in different cities. That was very important. So I live in Chicago while Patrick lives in Fort Wayne. So we also met in person once or twice to jumpstart the project, but it was important to keep online tools and keep the project online in kind of a centralized way so that we could work on it both independently and together to get the project done.